For the longest time, I thought of Until Dawn as simply another addition to the pantheon of great adventure games that kind of lie about how their story is impacted by player choice. Whether a plucky gang of horny teen survivors or a mountain littered with corpses, the game always ends in the same location, with the same showdown. Initially it seemed, like many choice-driven adventure games, that this is a one-and-done kind of affair. That while there is variation in outcomes, they amount to a limited pool of experience, and so you risk diminishing returns on subsequent runs. Playing through a second time, however, I realised that this isn't necessarily the case. While you can play the game as it functionally stands, as you would other titles of its genre, you would be missing out on one of the game's best hidden features. Under the surface, Until Dawn is not a normal adventure game, because rather than pulling the wool over your eyes, it invites you into the editing suite. Until Dawn is a horror film in disguise. With its appearance as a close comrade of titles like The Walking Dead or Life is Strange, Until Dawn might give the impression that it is primarily a showcase of tech rather than something more unique, taking a familiar formula and using it as the foundations of a showcase for what the PlayStation 4 is capable of. Of course, even were this true, all the components are there to make it a substantial interactive experience. A branching choice-driven narrative, a cast of characters whose fates are determined in part by how they interact, tense, high-pressure decisions that force you to contend with the conflict between survival instinct and human kindness. Player choice is so heavily ingrained in Until Dawn that we begin to see the first signs of what the game really is, and what this video is about, right from the start. The butterfly effect. A map that tracks character interaction and decisions made, loudly professes causality, yet whispers an alternate implication. One action leading to another, and then another, until hours down the line an event takes place of your design, but out of your control. There's a sense early on that the decisions you, the player, make and those of the 8 cast members aren't entirely one and the same. Some choices feel like they barely matter, that they are little more than flavour dialogue. Does Sam look through Chris's phone? Does Ashley let Matt see the heated conversation between Emily and Mike? Does Chris crack wise or offer a tender moment of sympathy with Josh? It's all very high school drama. And then there are the big moments, the live or die moments. Ones that come down to not only the decisions you've made throughout the game, but your reflexes at that critical point. Everything at the ready for surviving the night, potentially let down at the last moment by a shaky grip or an ill-timed button press. Steps from salvation, your head rolling away like a piece of tumbleweed. But there's something else going on when you make these choices. Something perhaps not reflected in the mechanics or the user interface, but in the player's head. Because while an effective point of reference for what decisions are perhaps worth keeping note of, the butterfly effect is a bit of a red herring. It emphasises how vital the player's input is to the game's numerous outcomes, but on repeat plays it's clear that the fate of the cast is not entirely up to you. Characters can't simply be offed at any time by any means. There's a curated pace to the game that results in a lot of the big decisions concluding at almost identical milestones in the story. Sam in particular highlights this. No matter how badly you mess up her sequences, no matter how awful the choices you make, she will always be around for the final showdown. It's what Patrick Klepek calls final girl armor. This is an interactive experience selling itself on player autonomy while still gripping the reins firmly, and that seems like it would be a recipe for frustration, but it works to help maintain a tone that is essential to the game's success, a feeling of not just participation, but creation. In other adventure games, there's a sense of you inhabiting the experience of a single actor. While the world might not revolve around you, every action you take has a consequence that impacts you in some way. It's your story, the events of your life, and any inkling of bigger things going on is often relegated to the fringes. The appeal of the branching narrative in this framework is that it offers a limited omnipotence to the player, allowing them a partially fluid, partially static canvas on which they can project a part of themselves. In a way, these are role-playing games in the most literal sense of the term. I talked about this in my Life is Strange video, how choice often comes down to not what the player wants, but what their system of morality will allow. However, applying this framing to Until Dawn doesn't quite work. It stubbornly refuses to adhere to the conventions of the genre, and there isn't really a central protagonist. You're constantly flitting between the 8 core cast members, often without fanfare, sometimes even without a scene transition, sometimes mid-conversation. Immediately there's a dynamic impact to this design. Decisions feel snappier, more acutely authored, and less to do with exerting power over the world, and more to do with being put on the spot. Switching between the numerous eyes of the story allows it to cover more ground without feeling bloated. When it's done with a particular sequence, it moves on, and often it cuts between the cast members at crucial moments in order to heighten tension. You know, like a movie. In a way, Until Dawn emulates that coveted cinematic quality most effectively because it embraces it as the frame, not just the feel. Everything feels built from the ground up to support this filmic atmosphere. You have these fixed camera angles and low interaction action sequences, the sharp, decisive scene transitions, the easily recognisable faces of its surprisingly famous cast. Even the dialogue feels like something straight out of a horror movie.
I'm going to show you some pictures of people that you have come to know and like. But maybe you don't like them as much as you pretend to.
In producing this video, I've really struggled to find a clear way to explain why this balance between directorial intent and player input is so successful. It's not enough to say that Until Dawn embraces its cinematic influences, because this describes almost every adventure game, especially those based on established film and TV licenses. Cinematic doesn't quite give you the big picture, because it neglects how important the interactive aspect is. The game wants you to get involved with it. A front row seat to the drama, the tension and the horror, with a loudspeaker in one hand and a clapperboard in the other. Not just in the style of a big budget horror film, it delivers a sort of abstract emulation of the making of a film. And to further elucidate this concept, let's talk about Ashley's fate. As you begin the game's final act, with the reveal of the Wendigo's curse and the push for survival never more intense, the gang, or what's left of them, is reunited in the basement of the lodge. After a tense moment in which Mike either shoots Emily or doesn't, Ashley takes a moment to read through Flamethrower Guy's journal. Several important bits of information are read out loud during this scene. How to kill these immortal beasts, what happens if you're bitten by one, and, critically, that they can mimic their prey. Not long after, as the gang ignore Mike's sage advice and go to search for him in the caves below, there's a moment when Ashley is separated from the group. Hearing what appears to be Jessica's cries for help, she has the option to either investigate this distress call or catch up with the group. One of these choices does not end well. Can you guess which one it is? During my first run of the game, I had completely forgotten about the mimicry factor and ran blindly into this trap, genuinely believing this to be the correct route to saving Jessica. A brief scene transition before this showed her waking up at the bottom of a lift shaft. It felt like an obvious correlation, only in this case 2 + 2 equaled gore. And then, deep into my second playthrough, now wise to the quirks of these immortal trickster goblins, I made the same stupid mistake again. Why? Because it felt like a natural fit for the story. You see, the difference between life and death is not just the act of an uninterested, omnipotent force. Many things can go into this decision, and this is where the game's more abstract elements come into play. Your first introduction to each of the 8 cast members brings with it a Super Smash Bros. Style splash screen that vomits out a slew of adjectives. Rather than stock characteristics, these adjectives form the basis of a set of meters whose ebb and flow are contingent on the decisions, big and small, you make for that person. The meters don't really have any impact on the game, but their effect on the player is substantial. It's a subtle psychological push that guides the player to act in certain ways. Choices end up becoming not those of the player, but of the kinds of people they want their cast to be. I keep driving Ashley to her doom because it fits perfectly with the person I had built her up to be. This sullen, guilt-fueled young girl who had altruistic motives at heart and genuinely would do anything for her friends. Maybe she knew that there was a chance this was a trap, but felt it was a gamble worth taking. Or maybe the panic of hearing a friend in distress simply shunted that vital piece of information out of her head. Or maybe she was just really, really dumb. That interpretation isn't given to you. Ashley doesn't have a specific character arc based on dialogue options taken throughout the game. Instead, you are free to extrapolate or infer from the subtext of the scene. And honestly, it doesn't actually matter whether those adjective-prompted meters work as intended or not. The game's magic and that cinematic quality only need the illusion of such, much like a romance film doesn't need its stars to be in love, only to convince us that they are. Ashley's demise is my go-to example for how games can be cinematic in meaningful ways, and I think Until Dawn's genre is perhaps the perfect setting for this. The gleeful draw of horror is in the compilation of dread, tension, nerve-wracking near misses, and those sadistically gore-fueled moments of hubris. Something as simple as choosing who gets to live and who does not becomes the foundation for dozens of sadistic little vignettes. You can play directly into tried and tested horror tropes, or rally against them. You can decide whether the cast are kind, flawed kids who made a horrible mistake and are being unjustly punished, or a gang of complete assholes who honestly deserve what's coming to them. You can have everyone survive the night, or leave not a single soul standing, or somewhere neatly in the middle. And crucially, you're never told what the right goal is. There's no fail state, meaning that the creative freedom of the player remains unimpeded, no matter the body count. And so you have a game that behaves like a film, in a genre known for its malleability and diversity, and an experience that can be called adventure game and horror film director sim in the same echoed scream. Until Dawn gets cinematic. It gets it right, and more importantly, it doesn't let it take away its identity. And that's why it is so much more than just another choice-driven adventure game.
Hey, guys, come on! Oh, I'm done with this! I really don't appreciate the silent treatment here.
Hello, Samantha. Looking for me? I don't think you'll have much luck by looking, Samantha. You're only going to see what I want you to see.